It was my daughter's handwriting on the return address, but the letter inside was from her lawyer. I stood at my mailbox on Hawthorne Crescent in the November cold, the kind of damp Kingston cold that gets into your knuckles before you even realize it, and I read the words 3 times because I was certain I had misunderstood. Cease and desist. Harassment. Unwanted contact. Legal action may follow. My daughter. My Stephanie. The same girl I drove to skating lessons every Saturday morning for 6 years. The same girl I sat beside in the emergency room at Kingston General when she was 19 and had her appendix out and was so frightened she wouldn't let go of my hand until the anesthesia took her under. She was threatening to take me to court. I went inside, I put the kettle on, I sat down at my kitchen table, and I did not cry, which surprised me because I am a woman who cries at dog food commercials. I think I was simply too stunned for tears. The kettle whistled and I ignored it. My name is Norma. I am 68 years old. I spent 31 years as a registered nurse at Hotel Dieu Hospital, mostly in palliative care, where I learned, very thoroughly, what it looks like when someone is running out of time. I retired 4 years ago when my husband passed. Arthur had a massive stroke in the spring, and by August he was gone, and the idea of going back to that ward, of sitting with other people's dying, felt like more than I could carry. We had one child, Stephanie. She was born when I was 32, which in 1988 felt slightly late for a first baby, though nobody says that anymore. She was a quiet, serious little girl who grew into a quiet, serious woman, and I loved her in the particular way you love someone you have watched become themselves. She married Daniel when she was 34. He was an engineer from Brampton, pleasant enough at the wedding, quieter than I expected at Christmas dinners. They settled in Ottawa, about 2.5 hours from Kingston, which felt like a manageable distance. They had 2 children, Theo, who is now 9, and a younger one, Lily, who just turned 6. I want to be honest about the kind of grandmother I tried to be. I came when I was invited. I did not drop in unannounced, not once, because I understood that Ottawa was their home and their life, and I was a guest in it. When Stephanie went back to work after Lily was born, she's a policy analyst with the federal government. I offered to come up 1 week per month to help. She said yes, so I did. Every 4th week, I drove the 401, let myself in with the spare key they gave me, and I kept the house running while she worked, and Daniel traveled for contracts. I cooked. I did laundry. I took Theo to his hockey practice and helped Lily with her letters. I baked the peanut-free muffins Theo's class needed for the holiday party. I fixed the broken drawer in the kitchen that had been broken since they moved in because I watched a YouTube video and it turned out to be simple. I was not trying to take over. I was trying to help. I think that's what I need you to understand before I tell you the rest. I was not trying to take over. The first sign that something had shifted came in February, about 18 months ago. I arrived on my regular week, and Stephanie met me at the door instead of letting me find my own way in. That was new. She stood in the doorway with her coat still on, as if she had somewhere to be, and she said she wanted to talk to me before I got settled. We sat in the living room, and she told me in a careful, measured voice that I recognized as the voice she used in professional settings that she and Daniel had been talking. They felt, she said, that my visits had become... She searched for the word, a lot, that the children were becoming too reliant on me, that Lily cried on the Sunday nights when I left, and that wasn't healthy, that Daniel sometimes felt like a guest in his own home on the weeks I was there. I listened. I did not interrupt, which cost me something. When she finished, I asked her what she would like me to do differently. She said they thought I should come less often, maybe every 2 months instead of every month. And when I came, I should try to be less, she used the word again, present. Less present. I turned that over in my mind on the drive home. How does a grandmother be less present? I had not been hovering. I had been useful. But I thought about what she said, and I decided that she knew her own household better than I did, and if she needed more space, I would give it to her. So I pulled back. I waited for them to call instead of calling first. I reduced my visits. I sent gifts for birthdays and kept the cards brief. In March, when Theo's hockey team made it to the regional tournament in Smiths Falls, 40 minutes from my house, I drove there and sat in the stands. I did not sit with them. I did not approach them between periods. I watched my grandson play from a distance, and I clapped with everyone else when his team scored. Stephanie texted me that evening. She said she was uncomfortable that I had attended without telling her. I replied that the tournament was a public event. She did not respond. In April, I received the lawyer's letter. I called my friend Maudie that same evening. Maudie is 71, a retired high school principal from Napanee, and she has more common sense than anyone I have ever met. She has been my closest friend for 27 years, and she has talked me down from ledges I didn't even know I was standing on. I read her the letter over the phone. There was a long silence. "Norma," she said finally, "they sent you a cease and desist letter because you went to a hockey tournament." That's what the letter says. "A public arena, where your grandson was playing." "Yes." Another silence. "Then do you want me to drive down?" I told her no. I told her I needed to think, not to talk. She understood that about me. What I thought about over the weeks that followed was whether they were right. That's the thing no one tells you about this kind of situation, the self-doubt that moves in like a tenant and won't leave. I lay awake at 2 a.m. and made myself consider seriously whether I had been the problem. Had I overstepped? Had I been so convinced I was helping that I had missed signs that I was unwanted? I thought about every visit, every meal I'd cooked, every load of laundry I'd folded. I thought about the broken drawer I'd fixed and wondered if fixing it had somehow been an insult. I did make one mistake that I will own. The previous September, I had reorganized the spice cabinet while I was cooking because I couldn't find anything and it was genuinely chaotic. I had not asked permission. I rearranged it and did not rearrange it back. Stephanie mentioned it once, tersely, and I apologized, and I thought that was the end of it. Perhaps it wasn't. But I also knew this. I had given those children my heart, not out of loneliness. I have a life. I have Maudie. I have my book club. I have my garden and my neighbors, and the volunteer work I do at the hospice on Thursday afternoons. I was not a woman clinging to her grandchildren because she had nothing else. I loved them the way you love small people who contain the future, and I had believed, genuinely believed, that love was something they felt too. I hired a lawyer in May. Her name was Miss Osei Bonsu. She had an office on Princess Street, and she was direct and calm in a way that suited me perfectly. She reviewed the cease and desist and told me it had no legal teeth. It was essentially a letter designed to frighten me into compliance. She also told me that under Ontario law, grandparents have the right to apply for access to grandchildren, and that courts consider the best interest of the child, which includes existing meaningful relationships. I had not known that. I had spent 40 years as a nurse, and I did not know my own rights as a grandmother. Ms. Osei Bonsu sent a letter to Stephanie and Daniel's lawyer proposing mediation. They refused. In June, they filed a formal application to have me legally prohibited from contact with Theo and Lily. The grounds listed included unauthorized presence at the children's activities, unsolicited contact, and interference with parenting decisions. The spice cabinet was mentioned in the filing. I am not making that up. I will be honest about what the summer was like. It was the hardest summer of my life, and I include the summer Arthur died. When Arthur died, there was grief, but grief is clean. It moves in one direction. It has a logic to it. This was different. This was grief twisted up with confusion and with something that felt, at its worst, like shame. Like I was a problem to be managed. Like 68 years of living and loving and working and showing up had added up to a cease and desist letter from my daughter's lawyer. There were days I did not get out of bed until noon. There were days I walked along the waterfront and talked to Arthur in my head, which I know sounds unhinged, but which was the most comforting thing I could think of. Arthur was a steady man. He would have known what to say. Maudie came on weekends. She brought groceries, and she sat with me, and she did not try to fix anything, which was the right instinct. My neighbor Reg, who is 74 and lost his wife 2 years ago, started leaving soup on my porch without explanation, which made me cry every single time. I wrote to Theo and Lily. I want to be transparent about this because it became a point of contention. I sent each of them a card once a month. Nothing elaborate, just a note letting them know I was thinking of them, that I loved them, that I hoped they were well. I sent the cards through the mail to their home address. I did not include my phone number. I did not ask them to respond or to keep secrets from their parents. I just wanted them to know their grandmother had not disappeared and had not stopped loving them. Stephanie's lawyer cited the cards in the court filing as evidence of continued harassment. I sat with that word for a long time. Harassment. I had spent a career watching people die. I had held the hands of strangers in their final hours and tried to make the crossing easier. I had never once, in 68 years, been called a harassing person. The hearing was scheduled for October at the Superior Court of Justice in Ottawa. Miss Osei Bonsu drove up with me. We checked into a hotel the night before and she went over everything one more time, patiently, and I tried to sleep and mostly failed. The courtroom was smaller than I had imagined. Stephanie sat on the opposite side with Daniel and their lawyer. She did not look at me when I came in. Daniel looked at the table. I looked at my hands. The judge was a woman in her late 50s, I estimated. She had reading glasses she wore on a chain in a manner that was efficient but not unkind. Her name was on a placard, but I couldn't read it from where I sat. Stephanie's lawyer spoke first. He argued that I had consistently disregarded their requests for space, that my presence had caused conflict in the household, that the children had been put in a position of feeling caught between their parents and their grandmother, and that a formal order limiting my contact was in the children's best interest. Then Miss Osei Bonsu spoke. She was methodical and quiet. She entered into evidence the cards I had sent, all of them, which I had kept copies of. 12 total, nothing in any of them that I would be ashamed to read aloud. She presented photographs from Theo's hockey seasons over the previous 4 years, in which I was present because I had been invited and welcomed. She submitted a statement from Theo's coach, who had met me at the rink, a perfectly ordinary retired grandmother who brought orange slices to the games. She also presented a letter. I had not known she was going to do this. She had asked me weeks earlier to write down, in my own words, what my relationship with Theo and Lily had been. I had done it, filled 3 pages longhand in the kitchen one evening with Arthur's old reading lamp on, because the overhead light gives me a headache. I had written about Theo's gap-toothed smile when he lost his first tooth and how he came running to show me because I happened to be there. I had written about Lily deciding that every Tuesday should be fancy dinner and insisting on cloth napkins even when we were just having soup. I had written about reading to them, about the way Lily would press herself against my side like a small, warm animal, about the way Theo still sometimes reached for my hand in parking lots out of pure habit. Ms. Osei Bonsu read sections of it aloud in that courtroom, and I stared at the table and did not cry, which was the hardest thing I have ever done. When she finished, the judge was quiet for a moment. She looked at the documents. She looked at Stephanie and Daniel. She looked at me. Then she said something I did not expect. She said she had read all the materials carefully. She said it was clear that significant family breakdown had occurred and that the feelings on both sides were real. She said she acknowledged that a parent's right to make decisions for their children was fundamental and was not something the court took lightly. And then she said the question before her was not whether this grandmother had been imperfect. The question was, what was in the best interest of these children? She said that the evidence before her showed a grandmother who had been present, loving, consistent, and whose contact with the children had been positive. She said she found no evidence of harm to the children from the contact that had taken place. She said that the monthly cards, in her view, were not harassment. They were love, maintained at a respectful distance. She said she would not grant the order. She also said something else, and this is the part that I have thought about almost every day since. She looked directly at my daughter and my son-in-law, and she said, "The law can draw lines between people, but it cannot make a family. What happens after today is up to you. These children will be adults one day, and they will make their own choices about who they want in their lives. She hoped everyone in that room would think carefully about what they wanted those children to remember about this time. Stephanie still did not look at me. We drove back to Kingston that evening. I sat in the passenger seat while Miss Osei Bonsu drove, and I watched the highway lights go past, and I felt, I'm not sure felt is even the right word. I was wrung out. I was relieved, and I was still sad, and I was not certain what had actually been won, because the people I loved were still not speaking to me. 3 days later, I found something in my mailbox, not a lawyer's letter, a handmade envelope, construction paper, folded and taped shut with far too much tape, the way a child does it. My name on the front in unsteady capital letters, Grandma Norma. Inside was a drawing. A house with a big yellow sun, a small figure with gray hair. Me, I understood, from the gray scribble on the head. 2 smaller figures beside me. Underneath, in the same careful printing, W.E. miss you. Lily and the Tho. I sat on my front step in the November cold, and I held that piece of paper, and I finally cried. The real kind, that comes up from somewhere deep and doesn't have any dignity to it at all. I cried for Arthur, who should have been there to see it. I cried for the months I had lost. I cried for my daughter, because whatever had happened, whatever had gone wrong in the space between us, she was still my daughter, and I still loved her, and I did not know how to stop. I don't know how this ends. I want to be truthful with you about that. There was no neat resolution after the courtroom, no phone call from Stephanie saying she was sorry, no Sunday dinner where everything was forgiven over a pot of soup. Families are not movies. They don't wrap up in 90 minutes. What I know is this. Theo called me 2 weeks ago from his father's phone. He said he had to be quick. He said he had found my number on an old card. He said he and Lily had been asking to see me and that they were working on it. His voice cracked a little at the end, the way boys' voices do at 9 when they are trying to be grown up about something that isn't grown up at all. I told him I loved him. I told him I wasn't going anywhere. I told him we had all the time in the world. I'm not sure that last part was true. At 68, with Arthur gone and the years moving the way they do now, I am more aware than most people of how much time is not guaranteed. But I said it because he needed to hear it, and because some reassurances are more important than their accuracy. Maudie came over last Friday, and we sat in my kitchen and drank too much tea, and she told me she thought I had handled all of it with more grace than she would have managed. I told her that was a low bar because Maudie is famously not graceful in conflict. She laughed and I laughed, and it was the first real laugh I'd had in a long time, and it surprised me. I have started writing letters again. Not to send right away. I don't want to create any more cause for concern, but I write them and I keep them in a folder in my kitchen drawer, one for Theo and one for Lily. I tell them about my week. I tell them about the cardinals at my bird feeder and about the cookies I made and what I named the squirrel who keeps stealing the suet. I tell them small, ordinary things because I think that's what grandmothers are for. Not the big dramatic moments, though those happen too. The small, ordinary ones. The ones that add up to a life. Someday I will give them the folder. Or maybe they'll find it after I'm gone, tucked in that kitchen drawer between the batteries and the expired coupons. Either way, they'll know I was here. They'll know I kept showing up, even when showing up meant sitting at a kitchen table writing letters nobody was reading yet. They'll know their grandmother did not stop. I keep thinking about that construction paper envelope. Too much tape, wobbly capital letters, a drawing of a yellow sun. Theo and Lily made that, not because anyone told them to, not because the courts ordered it, because children, when they are loved steadily and without condition, find their way back to that love, even when adults have built walls specifically designed to stop them. I don't think what happened to me was random. I think there's a logic to it, the kind that only becomes visible in hindsight. For most of my adult life, I tried to show up with decency, not perfectly, not without mistakes, but with genuine care. I reorganized a spice cabinet I should have left alone. I went to a hockey tournament I perhaps should have announced in advance. Those were real missteps and I own them. but the pattern of my life, the 31 years of sitting with people at their most vulnerable, the decades of trying to do right by the people I loved, that pattern doesn't disappear because someone files a legal document. What I learned sitting in that Ottawa courtroom is that integrity isn't something you perform for an audience. It's something you build quietly over years in small choices that no one is watching. When Tests that no one is watching. Osei Bonsu read my letter aloud, the one I wrote by hand under Arthur's old lamp. I realized the court wasn't judging me on that day. It was reading the accumulated record of a life, and the record held. Maudie told me once, years ago, when we were both still working and exhausted and complaining about something neither of us can remember, that the smartest thing a person can do is know the difference between a fight worth having and a wall worth walking away from. She was right, as she usually is. But I'd add something to that now. Knowing the difference requires you to be honest enough with yourself to see clearly, even when the situation is painful. That kind of clarity, the willingness to look at your own role in a conflict without flinching, is harder than it sounds. I spent an entire summer asking myself whether I had been the problem. That wasn't weakness, that was the only honest thing to do. And then there is the question of endurance. Not the dramatic kind, not the kind that announces itself, the quiet kind, the kind that writes letters no one is reading yet and keeps them in a kitchen drawer. The kind that drives 2.5 hours to a hockey tournament, sits alone in the stands, claps for a small boy who cannot acknowledge her, and drives home again without complaint. That is what it actually looks like, most of the time, to refuse to give up on someone you love. Theo called me from his father's phone. His voice cracked. He was 9 years old and he was trying to be grown up about something that was not fair to put on a 9-year-old. I told him we had all the time in the world, and I meant it in the only way that mattered. I am not going anywhere. I have not stopped. Whatever comes next, he will know that his grandmother was the kind of person who kept showing up, who tried to be honest, who endured without bitterness. That's the only thing I know how to leave them in the end. Not money, not property, just the example. Just the record of a life lived with as much decency as I could manage. I hope it's enough.